The wind howled outside Andre's auto shop, whistling through the tiny gaps around the windows that he'd been meaning to reseal for months. Outside, the snow was falling so thick and fast that he could barely see the road 20 feet away. Andre wiped his hands on a shop rag, leaving behind streaks of oil that never fully washed out, no matter how many times he ran it through his old washing machine. Looks like they got the forecast wrong again. Andre muttered to himself as he glanced at the small TV mounted in the corner of his workshop. The weatherman had predicted 6 inches of snow spread over the next 24 hours. Instead, almost that much had fallen in just the last 2 hours, and the storm was only getting worse. Andre had lived in rural Minnesota his whole life, so winter storms weren't anything new to him. But even by local standards, this one was shaping up to be nasty. The kind of storm that made the old-timers at the diner talk for months afterward. He looked at the clock on the wall, 5:45 p.m. The shop officially closed at 6 p.m., but on a night like this there was no point in staying open. Nobody in their right mind would be bringing their car in for an oil change or brake job in the middle of a blizzard. Andre had already sent his part-time helper home early. A college kid who was working to pay his tuition. Better get home before it gets any worse, he said to himself as he turned off the main shop lights, leaving just the small lamp on his workbench illuminated. He pulled his thick winter coat from the hook by the door and slipped it on. The coat was well worn but still did its job, much like Andre himself. At 42, Andre had the strong hands and broad shoulders of a man who had spent his life working with tools and engines. The small auto shop was his pride and joy, opened after 10 years of service as a military mechanic. It wasn't making him rich, but it provided a decent living and the independence he craved after years of following orders. He grabbed his thermos of coffee, now lukewarm after sitting forgotten during a busy afternoon fixing Mrs. Wilson's ancient Buick. The forecast had prompted a rush of locals bringing in their vehicles for last-minute winter checks before the snow hit. Andre never turned anyone away, even when it meant staying late. As he went to switch off the last light, something caught his eye through the front window of the shop, a pair of headlights weaving erratically on the highway. The lights disappeared for a moment, then reappeared, fainter now, angled wrong. Whoever was out there had slid off the road. Fool shouldn't be driving in this, Andre grumbled. But he was already pulling his coat tighter and grabbing his heavy-duty flashlight from the drawer. His truck was parked around back, equipped with snow chains and a winch, preparations he'd made that morning when the first weather alerts came through. The blast of cold air that hit him when he opened the door took his breath away. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees in the last couple hours, and the wind cut like a knife. Andre pulled his wool hat down lower over his ears and trudged through the rapidly deepening snow toward his truck. The old Ford started on the first try, a testament to Andre's meticulous maintenance. He flipped on the high beams and the extra fog lights he'd installed himself, creating a tunnel of visibility in the swirling white. Carefully, he eased onto the highway, his truck's tires crunching through the fresh snow. It took only a minute to spot the vehicle, a small SUV that had slid into the ditch about a quarter-mile down the highway. As Andre pulled up behind it, he could see it was tilted at an awkward angle, one wheel completely off the ground. He grabbed his flashlight and approached carefully, shining the light toward the driver's side window. Inside, he could make out the face of a woman, her expression a mixture of fear and relief at seeing another person. In the back seat, 2 small faces peered out, eyes wide. Andre tapped gently on the window, and after a moment it rolled down a few inches. "You folks okay in there?" he called over the howling wind. "I think so," the woman answered, her voice shaking slightly. "We slid off the road. The car won't start now." "I'm Andre. I own the auto shop just up the road," he said, gesturing back toward the dim outline of his building, barely visible through the snow. "Mind if I take a look?" The woman hesitated only for a second before nodding. "I'm Diane. These are my kids, Zoe and Tyler." Andre smiled at the children, who looked to be around 6 and 4. "Don't worry. We'll get you folks somewhere warm soon." He tried the driver's door, but the angle of the car in the ditch made it impossible to open. "Can you climb over to the passenger side?" he asked. Diane nodded and maneuvered herself over the center console, then helped her children do the same. Andre waded around through snow already up to his knees and opened the passenger door, helping them out one by one. "My truck's running. You all get in there where it's warm while I check your car," he said, handing Diane the keys. "Heater's on full blast. The family didn't need to be told twice. As they hurried to his truck, Andre popped the hood of the SUV and shined his flashlight inside. It didn't take long to spot the problem: a ruptured fuel line, likely damaged when the car went into the ditch. This vehicle wasn't going anywhere tonight. Back in his truck, Diane and the children had huddled together, the little one still wide-eyed but looking less frightened now that they were out of the cold. "Bad news," Andre said as he climbed in. "You've got a busted fuel line. Not something I can fix out here, especially not in this weather." Diane's face fell. "What do we do now?" "We were on our way back from visiting my mother in Greenfield. Home is still 2 hours away in good weather." Andre looked out at the highway, now completely obscured by blowing snow. The storm had closed in around them completely. "Highway's probably going to be closed soon if it isn't already," he said. "And this storm's supposed to last till morning at least." He thought for a moment. "My shop's just up the road. Got a small apartment above it where I stay sometimes when I'm working late. You folks can wait out the storm there." "Oh, we couldn't impose," Diane began, but a particularly violent gust of wind rocked the truck, and she fell silent. "It's not imposing. It's just common sense," Andre said firmly. "Besides, I've got heat, food, and coffee. Better than freezing out here waiting for a tow that probably won't come until tomorrow." Diane looked at her children, who were starting to shiver despite the truck's heater working overtime. "Thank you," she said simply. Andre nodded and put the truck in gear, carefully turning around on the empty highway. The drive back to his shop took 3 times longer than it should have, the truck creeping along at walking speed through the deepening snow. By the time they reached the shop, the storm had intensified even further. Andre parked as close to the side door as possible, then helped Diane and the children inside, the wind nearly knocking little Tyler off his feet. The shop felt almost warm after the bitter cold outside, but it wasn't a place to spend the night. Andre led them through a door at the back and up a narrow staircase to his small apartment. It wasn't much, a combined living room and kitchen, a bedroom and a bathroom, but it was clean and warm. Andre wasn't one for fancy decorations, but the space had a lived-in feel, with books stacked on end tables and a comfortable-looking couch facing a modest TV. "It's not the Ritz," Andre said as he turned up the thermostat. "But the heat works great and there's plenty of food." Diane set Tyler down and helped Zoe out of her snow-covered coat. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't come along." "Anyone would have done the same," Andre replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. Not everyone would have ventured out into a blizzard to help strangers. As Andre put on a pot of coffee and found some hot chocolate mix for the kids, he glanced out the window. The snow was coming down so heavily now that it looked like a solid white wall. The wind screamed around the corners of the building and even through the sturdy walls. He could feel the temperature dropping. Outside, the blizzard raged, cutting them off from the rest of the world as effectively as if they were on a deserted island. But inside, as the children's faces lit up at the promise of hot chocolate and Diane's tense shoulders finally began to relax, a different kind of warmth was beginning to grow. What had started as a routine day for Andre, turning wrenches and changing oil, had suddenly transformed into something entirely unexpected. None of them could have imagined how their paths would cross or what would come of this chance encounter. As the night settled in around them, with the storm showing no signs of letting up, they were just grateful for the shelter and safety they'd found. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a story none of them could have predicted. The storm seemed to swallow any sense of time as the night grew deeper. Andre had given up his bedroom to Diane and the kids, insisting that the couch had been his makeshift bed plenty of nights when he worked late. The wind rattled the windows of the small apartment above his shop, but the old building stood firm against the blizzard's assault. "More hot chocolate?" Andre asked, noticing Zoe clutching her empty mug with both hands. The little girl nodded shyly, her brown eyes tracking Andre's movements as he headed to the kitchen. It had been 3 hours since he'd brought the family in from the storm. The children had started to relax, their initial fear giving way to curiosity about their unexpected shelter and the man who had rescued them. "My daddy fixes cars too," Tyler announced from his spot at the small kitchen table. He was coloring on some old invoices Andre had found for him, flipping them over to their blank sides. Andre smiled as he stirred the hot chocolate. "Is that right? What kind of work does he do?" Diane's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Their father works at a dealership in Westbrook. We've been separated for about a year now. Andre nodded, not pressing further. He'd gotten good at reading people's expressions after years in the military and then running his own business. Some stories weren't meant to be shared with strangers, no matter how unusual the circumstances that brought them together. Well, I bet he'd be proud of how brave you two are being tonight, Andre said to the children, setting the fresh mug of hot chocolate in front of Zoe. Not everyone can handle getting stuck in the biggest blizzard we've had in 10 years. How long do you think we'll be stuck here? Diane asked quietly, glancing toward the window where snow was still falling heavily. Andre checked his phone. No service, he muttered. Towers must be down from the storm. The landline still works, though. He nodded toward the old corded phone mounted on his kitchen wall. I called the highway patrol before you woke up. They said the plows won't be out until morning at the earliest, and they're focusing on the main highways first. Diane bit her lip, worry creasing her forehead. Don't worry about it, Andre assured her. I've got plenty of food and the shop's got a good generator if the power goes out. We'll be fine here until they clear the roads. I can't thank you enough, Diane said, her voice catching slightly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Andre waved away her thanks, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Diane said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have driven right past, especially in weather like this. Andre shrugged, but there was truth in her words. He'd seen plenty of people look the other way when others were in trouble. It was part of why he'd always made it a point to do the opposite. A particularly strong gust of wind shook the building, making the lights flicker. Tyler looked up with wide eyes. Hey, buddy, Andre said. Want to see something cool? He headed to a closet in the hallway and pulled out an old army footlocker. The kids watched with interest as he set it on the floor and knelt beside it. What's in there? Zoe asked, sliding off her chair to get a closer look. Well, when I was in the army, I was a mechanic just like I am now, Andre explained as he unlatched the box. But we had to be ready for anything, including the power going out. He opened the lid to reveal an assortment of emergency supplies, flashlights, battery-powered lanterns, a hand-crank radio, and various other items. Wow, Tyler breathed, clearly impressed. Andre pulled out several of the lanterns and handed them to the children. These are special. They don't need batteries or electricity. You just crank this handle, and they make their own power, he demonstrated, turning the crank on one of the lanterns until it glowed brightly. The children's faces lit up with delight. If the power goes out, we'll have these, Andre said. And I've got plenty of blankets, a camp stove for cooking, and even some board games in that cabinet over there. You're really prepared, Diane observed. Andre smiled slightly. Military habit. Always be ready for the worst while hoping for the best. As the night wore on, Andre found himself sharing stories about his time in the service. Nothing scary or inappropriate for the kids. Just funny anecdotes about the places he'd been and the vehicles he'd fixed in impossible conditions. One time, we had to fix a truck in the middle of a sandstorm, he told them as they sat around the small living room. The storm still raging outside. Sand got everywhere, in our eyes, our ears, our mouths. I was finding sand in my boots for weeks afterward. The children giggled, and even Diane smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. How long were you in the military? She asked. 10 years, Andre replied. Signed up right after high school. Didn't have money for college, and I always liked working with engines. And then you came back here and opened your shop? Andre nodded. Took some time. Had to save up, get a small business loan. This place used to be old Joe Miller's repair shop. When he decided to retire, he gave me a good deal on it. Said he liked the idea of it staying a garage rather than being torn down for something else. It's a good shop, Diane said. I noticed how clean it was, even with all the work you do. That's another military habit, Andre admitted. Everything has its place. Makes it easier to find what you need when you need it. Later, after the children had finally fallen asleep in Andre's bed, Diane returned to the living room where Andre was checking the weather updates on his old radio. Any news? She asked softly. Andre shook his head. Storm's expected to last through the night. They're saying it might be the worst one we've had in 20 years, not just 10. Some places are reporting 3 feet of snow already. Diane sank onto the couch beside him. I should have listened to my mother. She wanted us to stay another day, but I was worried about the kids missing school. You couldn't have known it would get this bad. Andre said. Weather forecast said it would be half what we're getting. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the howling of the wind the only sound. Then Diane spoke again. I was afraid when I saw you coming toward our car, she admitted quietly. Not because... it wasn't because you're... She trailed off, embarrassed. I get it, Andre said simply. Big guy approaching your car in a blizzard, kids in the back seat. I'd be cautious too. Diane looked relieved that he understood without her having to explain further. I feel silly about it now. Don't, Andre said. Better to be cautious than sorry. World can be a dangerous place sometimes. Not tonight, though, Diane said softly. Tonight we got lucky. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having finally blown itself out sometime in the early hours. The world outside was transformed, buried under a pristine blanket of white that sparkled in the sun. But the beauty came with complications. The snow was piled high against the doors and windows, effectively trapping them inside. Andre was already up and making coffee when Diane emerged from the bedroom, her hair slightly mussed from sleep. Good morning, he greeted her. How'd you sleep? Better than I expected, she admitted. The kids are still out cold. I think yesterday wore them out completely. Andre handed her a mug of coffee. Looks like we might be here another day at least, he said, gesturing toward the window. Outside, the snow had drifted against the building, reaching almost to the second-story windows in some places. I've got a path I can clear to get down to the shop, but the roads won't be passable for a while yet. Diane's face fell slightly, but she nodded. I should call my boss, let him know I won't make it in today. Phone's all yours, Andre said, pointing to the landline. Cell service is still down. While Diane made her call, Andre began gathering ingredients for breakfast. His pantry wasn't fancy, but he had the basics: eggs, bacon, bread for toast. As he cooked, he found himself thinking about how strange it was to have other people in his space. He'd lived alone for so long that he'd gotten used to the quiet, to doing things his own way on his own schedule. But there was something nice about the company, too, about having voices filling the rooms that usually echoed with just his own footsteps, especially the children's laughter, which seemed to warm the place in a way his heating system never could. When the kids woke up and stumbled sleepily into the kitchen, their faces lit up at the sight of the breakfast Andre had prepared. Wow, are those chocolate chip pancakes? Zoe asked, eyes wide. Andre grinned. Sure are. Special recipe my grandmother taught me. She always said there's no bad day that can't be improved by chocolate chip pancakes. As they all sat down to eat, Andre caught Diane watching him with a thoughtful expression. When their eyes met, she smiled. A genuine smile that reached her eyes and made something shift in Andre's chest. Whatever happened when the roads cleared and real life resumed, he was glad he'd decided to check on those headlights in the storm. Some decisions, it seemed, led to unexpected places. What neither of them knew yet was just how unexpected those places would be. By the afternoon of their second day together, cabin fever was starting to set in. The novelty of being snowed in had worn off, and the kids were getting restless. They'd already colored on every scrap of paper Andre could find and watched the limited selection of DVDs he kept in the apartment. I'm bored, Tyler announced, flopping dramatically onto the couch. His sister nodded in agreement, looking up from the book she'd been flipping through. Diane shot Andre an apologetic look. I'm sorry. They're used to having more to do. Andre waved away her concern. Actually, I've got an idea. He glanced out the window. The sun was shining brightly now, making the snow-covered landscape almost blindingly white. How about we head down to the shop? I cleared a path earlier while you were on the phone with your mother. The kids perked up immediately, their faces brightening at the POI. Prospect of exploring somewhere new. Is it safe? Diane asked. Completely, Andre assured her. The shop's warm. I keep it heated even when I'm not working. And I've got some stuff down there that might keep these two entertained for a while. 10 minutes later, bundled in their coats despite the short journey, they followed Andre down the cleared pathway to the main floor of the garage. The shop looked different in the daylight, less intimidating than it had seemed to Diane when they'd hurried through it the night before. It was surprisingly neat for an auto repair shop, with tools hanging in organized rows on pegboards, and the concrete floor cleaner than one might expect. 3 service bays stretched before them, one containing an old Chevy pickup that Andre had been working on before the storm hit. This is so cool, Zoe whispered. Looking around with wide eyes at the specialized equipment and tools, Andre grinned. You think so? Most kids your age would rather be at the mall or playing video games. Zoe shook her head firmly. I like seeing how things work. Andre's smile widened. A girl after my own heart. Come on then, let me show you something interesting. He led them to a workbench where he'd been rebuilding an engine before the storm. Parts were laid out in a precise order, each one cleaned and ready to be reassembled. This is the heart of a car, he explained, gesturing to the engine block. Everything else, the wheels, the doors, the fancy stereo system, none of it matters if this isn't working right. Tyler looked skeptical. Hearts are supposed to be red and shaped like this. He made a heart shape with his hands. Andre laughed. You're right about real hearts, buddy. This is more like a car's brain and heart combined. It thinks and pumps all at the same time. Over the next hour, Andre gave them an impromptu lesson on basic automotive mechanics, explaining how engines worked in terms the children could understand. He let them handle safe parts, showing them how pistons moved and how the different pieces fit together. Diane hung back, watching with a mixture of amusement and something else, something warmer, as Andre patiently answered the kids' endless questions. He had a natural way with them, never talking down or oversimplifying, but finding just the right words to make complex concepts understandable. You're good with them, she said quietly. When the children were distracted examining a carburetor Andre had given them to look at, he shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Kids are easy. They just want honesty and respect, same as anyone else. Not everyone sees it that way, Diane replied. Their father, she paused, then continued carefully. He never had much patience for explaining things, said it was a waste of time. Andre frowned slightly but didn't comment on her revelation. Instead, he said, my old man was like that too. Never explained anything, just expected me to know. When I was learning mechanics in the army, I had this sergeant, tough as nails, but man, could he teach. He'd break everything down step by step, no matter how many times you needed to hear it. That's when I really started to love this work. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an engine outside. Andre moved to the shop's front window, brushing aside the blinds to look out. Snowplow, he announced. They're starting to clear the main road. The children rushed to look, excited by the massive vehicle pushing mountains of snow to the side of the highway. Does that mean we can leave soon? Zoe asked, and Diane was surprised to hear what sounded like disappointment in her daughter's voice. Not quite yet, Andre said. They're just doing the main highways first. The access road to the shop probably won't get cleared until tomorrow at the earliest. Rather than looking relieved, the children seemed pleased by this news. Can we build a snowman? Tyler asked hopefully. Since we have to stay another day? Andre looked to Diane for permission. She hesitated, then nodded. I guess a little fresh air wouldn't hurt as long as we stay close to the building. The next hour was filled with laughter as they ventured into the winter wonderland that surrounded the shop. The snow was perfect for packing, and soon they had constructed not just one snowman, but an entire family of snow. People lined up in front of the garage. Andre's deep laugh echoed across the snow-covered landscape as Tyler tried to give his snowman a mustache using a small twig. The sound struck Diane suddenly. When was the last time she'd heard a man's genuine laughter? Not the forced chuckles her ex-husband had given at office parties, or the condescending snickers when he thought she'd said something foolish but real, heartfelt laughter. It had been a long time. As the short winter day began to fade toward dusk, they headed back inside, cheeks red from the cold but spirits high. Andre made hot chocolate again while Diane helped the children out of their wet outer layers. This is the best snow day ever, Zoe declared as she cupped her hands around her mug. Even better than when school gets canceled? Andre asked with a raised eyebrow. Way better, she confirmed seriously. I learned more cool stuff today than in a whole week at school. Diane watched her daughter's animated face as she recounted her favorite parts of Andre's mechanical lessons to her brother. There was a brightness in Zoe's eyes that had been missing for months, ever since the divorce had turned their lives upside down. Later, after they'd returned to the apartment and the children were engrossed in a board game Andre had found in a closet, Diane's phone suddenly chimed. She pulled it from her pocket with surprise. Cell service is back, she announced. Andre nodded. Power and phone companies are usually pretty quick after storms like this. Lots of practice, unfortunately. Diane scrolled through the notifications flooding her screen. My boss texted. He saw the storm coverage on the news and was worried when he couldn't reach me. The news? Andre looked up from the pot of chili he was stirring. Diane nodded. Apparently this storm is all over the national news. They're calling it the worst blizzard to hit this region in 30 years. She continued scrolling. Oh no, what is it? Andre asked, setting down his spoon. My apartment building lost power, Diane said, reading the message from her neighbor. They're saying it might be out for days because some of the main lines went down. Andre considered this information for a moment. Well, you're welcome to stay here until it's back on. No sense in going home to a freezing apartment. Diane looked up, surprise evident on her face. We couldn't impose like that. You've already done so much. It's not an imposition, Andre said firmly. It's just common sense. Besides, he added with a small smile, I've gotten used to the company. Before Diane could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It's my mother. She stepped into the bedroom to take the call while Andre returned to his cooking. When she emerged 10 minutes later, her expression was troubled. Everything okay? Andre asked. Diane sighed. My mother's been watching the news. They're saying this area got hit the worst, and she saw footage of cars stranded on the highway. She's been imagining the worst since she couldn't reach us. But she's relieved now? Andre asked. Yes, but now she's worried about us being stuck with a... Diane trailed off, looking embarrassed. With a stranger, Andre finished for her tactfully, though they both knew that might not have been exactly how her mother had phrased it. I'm sorry, Diane said. She's from a different generation, Andre shrugged. It's natural to worry about your kids and grandkids. Did you tell her we're all doing fine? Diane nodded, grateful for his understanding. I did. I told her how you rescued us and have been taking care of us. I think she was surprised. By what? Andre asked, stirring the chili again. Diane met his eyes. By how lucky we were to have been found by someone like you. Their gaze held for a moment longer than was necessary, before Andre looked away first, suddenly very focused on the dinner preparations. That evening, as they ate around Andre's small kitchen table, the atmosphere had changed subtly. What had started as an emergency arrangement now felt almost comfortable, as if they'd known each other much longer than just 2 days. The children chatted easily, Tyler demonstrating his new knowledge about engines with spoon gestures, while Zoe peppered Andre with questions about the different cars he'd worked on. Diane found herself laughing more than she had in months. The weight of single parenthood and financial struggles temporarily lifted from her shoulders. None of them could have predicted what would happen the following day, when a local news crew, doing a story on the aftermath of the historic blizzard, would happen upon Andre's shop and discover the unlikely shelter he'd provided for a stranded family. None of them could have known how that chance encounter would change all their lives forever. The morning of their third day dawned clear and cold. The snowplows had worked through the night, and the main highway was now passable, though the side roads remained buried under feet of snow. Andre had risen early and was clearing a path from his shop to the newly plowed road when he spotted the news van. It crawled slowly along the highway, a cameraman leaning out the passenger window to film the aftermath of the historic blizzard. Andre didn't pay much attention to it at first, focused on his shoveling. But then the van slowed as it approached his shop, eventually pulling over to the side of the road. A woman in a bright blue coat jumped out, followed by the cameraman hoisting his equipment onto his shoulder. They trudged through the snow toward Andre, who paused his work, leaning on his shovel. Good morning, the woman called, her breath visible in the cold air. I'm Lisa Chen from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on the blizzard recovery. Mind if we ask you a few questions about how your business weathered the storm? Andre wasn't much for cameras or attention, but he nodded politely. Sure, I guess. Lisa's smile brightened as she approached. The cameraman positioned himself and gave her a thumbs up. I'm here at Wilson's Auto Repair, where owner Andre Wilson has been digging out after what meteorologists are calling the storm of the century, she began, addressing the camera professionally before turning to Andre. Mr. Wilson, how has your business been affected by this historic blizzard? Andre shifted uncomfortably. Well, been closed for a few days, obviously, but that's not unusual for winter storms around here. And you stayed here at the shop during the blizzard? Lisa prompted. I did, Andre confirmed. Got an apartment upstairs. At that moment, the shop door opened and Zoe stepped out, bundled in her winter coat. "Andre, Mom wants to know if you want coffee." She stopped short when she saw the camera, her eyes widening. Lisa looked between Andre and the little girl, clearly sensing a better story than a simple business owner interview. "And who's this?" Before Andre could answer, Diane appeared in the doorway behind her daughter, Tyler peering around her legs. "Zoe, I told you to put your hat on if you were going outside." She too froze at the sight of the news crew. Lisa's journalistic instincts were now fully engaged. "Are these your family members?" she asked Andre carefully. "No," Andre said simply. "They were stranded in the storm. Their car slid off the road near my shop. I brought them in until it was safe to leave." Lisa's eyes lit up with interest. "You rescued a family during the blizzard?" Andre shrugged, uncomfortable with the way she'd phrased it. "Anyone would have done the same. But not everyone did," Lisa pointed out, turning to Diane. "Ma'am, could you tell us about your experience? Being stranded in the worst blizzard in 30 years with your children, and then being rescued by Mr. Wilson here?" Diane stepped forward, one hand still on Tyler's shoulder. "We would have been in real trouble if Andre hadn't found us. Our car was stuck in a ditch, it was getting dark, and the temperature was dropping fast. He not only got us to safety, but has been letting us stay here since the roads have been impassable." Lisa nodded encouragingly, clearly seeing the human interest potential of the story. "And how has that experience been?" Diane smiled, glancing at Andre. "Honestly, much better than you might expect for being stranded by a blizzard. Andre has been incredibly kind and generous. He's even been teaching the kids about car engines to keep them entertained. He made us snowmen," Tyler piped up, his shyness overcome by the excitement of possibly being on TV. "And chocolate chip pancakes," Zoe added seriously. "They're the best pancakes ever." Lisa laughed, charmed by the children. "It sounds like Mr. Wilson went above and beyond what most people would do for strangers." Andre was now thoroughly embarrassed. "It's really not a big deal," he insisted. "Just being a decent neighbor." "Decency makes for a good story these days," Lisa said with a smile. She turned back to the camera. "A simple act of kindness during a historic storm has brought together strangers who now share a unique bond." Andre Wilson didn't think twice about helping a stranded family. And for the past 3 days, his auto shop has been a warm refuge from the brutal winter weather. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, with Lisa asking questions about the storm, the rescue, and how they'd passed the time while snowed in. Despite Andre's attempts to downplay his role, Diane and the kids painted a picture of him as their hero, emphasizing his generosity and kindness. What no one mentioned on camera, what Andre had carefully avoided discussing, was the state of his business. The shop had been struggling for months before the storm hit. Rising costs, competition from a new chain repair shop that had opened on the other side of town, and Andre's habit of giving discounts to elderly customers and veterans had all taken a toll on his bottom line. The past due notices were piling up in his desk drawer, and he'd been weighing whether he could afford to keep his one part-time employee on the payroll. After the news crew finally left, promising that the segment would air on the evening news, Andre turned to Diane with an apologetic look. "Sorry about that. Didn't mean for you all to get dragged into a TV interview." Diane shook her head. "Don't apologize. It was nice to see someone recognizing what you did for us. Like I keep saying, it wasn't a big deal." "Yes, I know." Diane cut him off with a smile. "That's exactly why it is a big deal, Andre. Because you think it's just normal to risk your safety to help strangers and then share your home with them for days. But trust me, it's not what most people would do." Andre looked away, uncomfortable with her praise. He changed the subject. "Roads should be clear enough by this afternoon for me to drive you folks home. I can give your car a tow to my shop and fix that fuel line. Probably have it ready by tomorrow." Something like disappointment flashed across Diane's face, but she nodded. "Right, of course. We should get out of your hair. You've already done more than enough." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Tyler tugged on Andre's sleeve. "Can we finish the engine lesson before we go? You promised to show me how the sparkly plugs work." "Spark plugs," Andre corrected with a chuckle, the tension broken. "And sure, buddy. We've got time for one more lesson before you head out." The rest of the morning passed quickly. Andre showed Tyler and Zoe how spark plugs created the tiny explosions that powered an engine. letting them hold the components and ask questions. Diane packed up their few belongings and cleaned the small apartment, insisting it was the least she could do to thank him. By early afternoon, the side roads had been cleared enough for travel. Andre loaded Diane and the kids into his tow truck, with Diane's disabled SUV hitched behind. The drive to her apartment took almost an hour. The normally short trip extended by snow-narrowed roads and traffic as people ventured out for the first time since the storm. When they pulled up to Diane's building, Andre could see that the power was still out. The windows were dark despite the early evening hour, and no lights illuminated the entryway. "Looks like your neighbor was right about the power," he observed. Diane bit her lip, looking at the building with concern. "It's going to be freezing in there." "Mom, I don't want to stay in a cold house," Zoe said, voicing what they were all thinking. Andre made a quick decision. "Why don't you grab whatever you need for another night or two? You can stay at the shop until your power's back on. No sense in freezing when I've got plenty of space and heat." Relief washed over Diane's face. "Are you sure?" "We've already imposed so much, I'm sure," Andre said firmly. "Besides, I still need to fix your car. Makes more sense for you to be nearby when it's done." The truth was, Andre had gotten used to having them around. His small apartment above the shop, which had always felt adequate before, now seemed lonely when he imagined it without Diane's warm smile or the children's laughter. It was a feeling he wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. While Diane and the kids went inside to pack some clothes and necessities, Andre waited in the truck, the engine running to keep the heat on. His phone buzzed with a text from his part-time helper, Pete. "Boss, you're on the news. They're calling you a hero. Channel 7, tune in." Andre groaned. He'd hoped the interview might be a small segment buried in the broadcast, not a featured story. He didn't like attention, never had. In the Army, he'd always been the one working quietly in the background, letting others take credit for successful missions. That was just his way. What Andre didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the simple news story about his good deed was already spreading beyond the local station. In the age of social media, stories of genuine kindness had a way of catching fire. By the time they returned to his shop that evening, the video clip had been shared thousands of times, reaching far beyond their small Minnesota town. The next morning would bring a surprise that would change everything, for Andre's struggling business, for Diane and her children, and for the connection growing between them that neither had expected. When their paths crossed in a blizzard just a few days before, Andre was halfway through fixing Diane's fuel line the next morning, when Pete burst through the shop door, his face flushed with excitement. "Boss, have you checked your phone or your computer?" "Anything?" The young man was practically bouncing. Andre straightened up from under the hood of Diane's SUV, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Been working since 6, why?" Pete pulled out his phone, fumbling in his haste. "That news story about you rescuing Diane and the kids? It's everywhere. People are sharing it like crazy." "What do you mean, everywhere?" Andre frowned, uncomfortable with the idea of being in the spotlight. "I mean everywhere," Pete insisted, holding out his phone. "Look, the video's got over 100,000 views already, and people are commenting from all over the country." Andre reluctantly took the phone and scrolled through the comments. Most were overwhelmingly positive, praising his actions and kindness. Some shared their own stories of being helped by strangers in difficult situations, but what caught Andre's attention were the comments asking how people could support his business. "People want to know if you have a website or a way to donate," Pete explained. "They're saying they want to help a good person who helps others." Andre handed the phone back, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't need donations. I was just being a decent human being." "Well, decent human beings are rare enough these days that people want to support them," Pete replied. "And boss, no offense, but we both know the shop's been struggling." Before Andre could respond, the shop phone rang. Pete answered it, then held it out to Andre with a grin. "It's the Channel 7 news again. They want to do a follow-up story." The next few hours were a whirlwind. The news crew returned, this time with Lisa Chen asking more detailed questions about Andre's business, how long he'd been operating, and his background as a military mechanic. They filmed him working on cars and interviewed Pete about what kind of boss Andre was. "He's the best," Pete said without hesitation. "Taught me everything I know about cars. Gives discounts to old folks who can't afford repairs but need their cars to get to doctor appointments. Let me take time off when my mom was sick last year and still paid me." Who does that these days? Andre cringed at hearing his private business practices broadcast to the world, but there was nothing he could do to stop it now. When Diane and the kids returned from a quick trip to the grocery store, the power in their apartment still wasn't back on. They found themselves pulled into the follow-up interview as well. "We've only known Andre for a few days," Diane told the reporter, "but in that time, he's shown us more kindness than some people we've known for years. He didn't just rescue us from the cold. He made us feel safe and welcome in a scary situation." By evening, when the second news segment aired, Andre's phone was ringing nonstop. Local people were calling to book appointments, ask about his services, or simply thank him for representing their town so well. Some callers weren't even from Minnesota. They were from states across the country, asking if they could send support or if he had an online fundraiser set up. "I don't understand," Andre said, bewildered as he sat at his small kitchen table with Diane after the kids had gone to bed. "I didn't do anything special." Diane reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "That's exactly why it's resonating with people, Andre. You don't think helping a stranger is anything special. But in a world where people often look the other way, someone who stops to help without expecting anything in return stands out." Andre looked down at her hand on his, then back up at her face. There was something in her eyes that made his heart beat a little faster. But before he could figure out what to say next, his phone buzzed again. The next morning, the local bank manager showed up at the shop before opening hours. Andre, who was already at work despite the early hour, looked up in surprise when the man knocked on the service bay door. "Mr. Bennett," Andre greeted him. Recognizing the manager who had reluctantly approved his small business loan years ago, "What can I do for you?" "Actually, Mr. Wilson, I'm here to see what I can do for you," Bennett replied with an unusual smile. "We've set up a business support fund for you at the bank. People have been calling and coming in since yesterday wanting to contribute. I thought you should know that as of this morning, there's over $15,000 in the account." Andre stared at him, speechless. "And that's just locally," Bennett continued. "There's also an online fundraiser that someone in town set up for you. Last I checked, it was approaching $50,000, with donations coming in from across the country." Andre had to sit down on a nearby stool, his legs suddenly unsteady. $50,000. It was enough to pay off all his overdue bills, make the repairs to the shop he'd been putting off, and still have operating capital left over. It was the difference between closing down in a few months and staying open for years to come. "I can't accept that money," he said weakly, though even as he spoke, he knew his protest was futile. "I was just helping someone in need. I don't deserve all this." "The world disagrees," Bennett said simply. "And if you don't mind my saying so, after 20 years in banking, it's refreshing to see money flowing towards someone who actually deserves it." When Diane came downstairs later that morning, she found Andre sitting at his desk in the small office adjacent to the service bays, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. He looked up at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something like fear. "People are donating money. A lot of money." "Because of that news story," Diane smiled. "I know. I may have helped set up that online fundraiser." "You?" Andre blinked in surprise. She nodded. "With some help from Pete. He showed me how to do it yesterday while you were working on my car." She hesitated, then added, "Are you angry?" "No," Andre said slowly. "Not angry, just overwhelmed. I don't know what to do with all this." "You'll figure it out," Diane said confidently. "And for what it's worth, I have some ideas. I do have a business management degree that's been gathering dust since I had the kids." Over the next several days, as Diane's power was finally restored and she prepared to return to her apartment with the children, she and Andre spent hours talking. The viral story had given Andre's business more attention than he'd ever imagined possible. New customers were calling daily, and the donation fund had continued to grow. "You could expand," Diane suggested one evening as they sat in his office after closing, looking over the books. "This building has enough space for at least one more service bay. You could hire another mechanic, maybe even offer specialized services." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "I've always wanted to start an apprenticeship program for kids who want to learn the trade but can't afford technical school." "That's perfect," Diane said, her eyes lighting up. "We could set aside some of the donation money for that. A scholarship fund of sorts." Andre noticed her use of "we" but didn't comment on it. The truth was, he'd come to value her input over the past few days. She had a head for business that complemented his mechanical skills. "What about you?" he asked. "You mentioned your job isn't great. What would you really want to do if you could choose anything?" Diane looked surprised by the question. "Honestly, I've always wanted to run my own business. I started my business degree with big plans, but then life happened. Marriage, kids, divorce." She shrugged. "Dreams get put on hold." "Maybe they don't have to stay on hold," Andre said quietly. 6 months later, the newly expanded Wilson & Collins Auto Service opened its doors. The renovated shop now boasted 4 service bays, state-of-the-art equipment, and a small classroom space where Andre taught automotive basics to local youth. Diane managed the business side of things, having quit her unfulfilling office job to become Andre's full business partner. The grand opening was attended by half the town, including Lisa Chen and her news crew, who had followed the story of the Blizzard mechanic and the family he'd rescued through its many developments. The viral fundraiser had eventually reached over $100,000, enough to not only save Andre's business but transform it entirely. But the most significant transformation wasn't in the shop itself. It was in the lives of the people involved. Andre, who had spent years in solitude, now found himself surrounded by community. Diane had reclaimed her professional confidence and given her children stability they hadn't known since before the divorce. Zoe and Tyler had gained not only a mentor in Andre, but eventually a father figure who taught them not just about cars but about compassion, and it had all started with a simple decision: to check on a stranded car during a blizzard instead of hurrying home to Hurty. As Andre stood outside his shop on opening day, watching Diane cut the ceremonial ribbon while the kids cheered, he reflected on how quickly life could change. One moment of kindness, one choice to help rather than turn away, had altered the trajectory of 4 lives and touched countless others. "Penny for your thoughts?" Diane asked, slipping her hand into his as the crowd moved inside for refreshments. Andre squeezed her hand gently. "Just thinking about snowstorms and broken fuel lines," he said with a smile, "and how sometimes the worst days turn out to be the beginning of the best ones." Diane reached up and kissed his cheek. "Best blizzard ever," she whispered, and together they walked into their shared future. One that neither could have imagined just 6 months before, when a mechanic had spotted headlights in a snowstorm and decided to stop.